go to the to Parliament to talk about the Adwoa Safo matter, but we know that it is not limited only to Adwoa Safo, because Odikro, which has been telling us for many years now about the level of absenteeism in Parliament, is telling us that perhaps there are more MPs who are supposed to suffer and not Adwoa Safo alone. So I wrote this article in 2018 on the back of evidence from Odikro, and I noted a few things. That in fact, between January 2013 and July 2014, the average MP missed 1 in every 4 sittings of the House. This increased by 58% by 2015. On June 12, 2015, only 83 MPs were in the House. Over 22% were absent for many sittings without permission. In 2017, 27 MP ministers and 21 MP deputy ministers absented themselves more than 15 times. That's beyond the time that the Constitution requires, prohibits, during some 80 sittings. Now, I say you shouldn't get surprised, because they absent themselves without permission, and that's a conduct in complete disregard of the Constitution and their own rules. But whilst those who double as ministers may give the obvious excuses, it is scandalous to find that opposition MPs are equally guilty, and NDC MPs constitute 28%, while 72% of MPP MPs form the list of absentee MPs. Both the Constitution in Article 97 and Order 16 of the Standing Orders of Parliament prohibit this conduct. An MP may only absent himself for such a long period within 3 months, that's a meeting of the House, with a period of 3 months, by seeking permission in writing from the Speaker. The Constitution dictates that MPs who violate this rule must vacate their seats, and the order empowers and requires the Speaker to declare such seats vacant. The Speaker won't do it. They don't ever do it. This time around, it does appear that it will happen. They disagree on how it must happen. Let's listen to them.
Mr. Speaker, the committees of this House has the authority to determine the urgency of a bill. Once they make the determination, it binds all of us. Plenary has no business in this. People should understand that. So this is not the first time a committee is authorized to make a declaration for and on behalf of the House.
The Parliament of Ghana is not the Speaker of Parliament, and that the Parliament of Ghana is not the chairman of the Subsidiary Legislation Committee of Parliament, and that Parliament is not the majority leader, nor is it the minority leader. That the Parliament of Ghana is the well-constituted 275 members of Parliament elected thereon to exercise the legislative authority of Ghana on their behalf. On their behalf.
I have consulted the old lady. The old lady has given me an advice, and I think that advice is correct, because the issue raised by the majority leader is both of substantive and procedural law. And I need time to submit to this House a reasoned, written ruling. I cannot, in the haste, give you the ruling.
Right, so Martin, what do you say about this? According to Odikro, we should have about 33 of the lawmakers suffering the fate that should befall Adwoa Safo.
Yes, that is like an explosion, right? What I saw the figures, that is staggering, right? So what we'll do is that, since we've not had the opportunity to go into the basis for the 33, for now, I want to reserve judgment we'll ask Odikro to give us further details. Maybe they should consult the votes and procedures.
Yes, they've done so. So they start with a list beginning with Adwoa Safo, who has absented herself for 40 sittings.
Out of the 42 for that meeting. That
40
meeting
sittings.
42.
Henry Kote, who has been pardoned, that's the Ayawaso Central, right?
Yeah.
Yes, 30 sittings. Ejenim Boatin Kweku, Brekum West, 28 sittings. Joe Gate, Esikado Ketam, 28 sittings. Ajiman Menu Kweku, Doma Central, 24 sittings. Kojo Opon Nkrumah, Ofuasia Yurebi, 24 sittings. Ignatius Bafo, 25 sittings. So there's a tall list. But you know that it was the Accra minister and Kenneth Japon who were also referred to the committee, and they have explained themselves and they have been pardoned.
Excellent. Yes. So the point about this 33 that I'm saying we need further information is I see now that the allegation has been made. You know, even this one has been sent to the speaker. The speaker has not yet responded. That's why we will have to reserve judgment on that. The persons involved will also then have opportunity to react. We'll get to see those who were given medical excuse duty and the rest. Then we will know the ones who are culpable. So for now, that one.
All right.
So we look at Adwoa Safo, the debate as to whether losing the seat automatically or coming, the matter being brought back to the plenary. I support the school of thought that the matter should come back to the plenary as it has come, and the speaker is going to give a ruling on it. Because otherwise, it can bring chaos that when an allegedly erring MP appears before the privileges committee, they look at it, and when they come to their decision, pro tanto, that's the end. If they say he is falling foul of the rules, so then the seat becomes automatically vacant. I think, no, that would cause a lot of problems for due process. So it's better that, like it happened, the Amwati one, you bring it back to the plenary, then they look at it. Yes, that's the way I see it. You know, like they've been saying, Abraham Lincoln once said, no law can write down, specify everything. So our constitution can't write everything procedurally, not even the standing orders of parliament. So gleaning from the constitution and the standing orders, I think the right thing is that when the privileges committee is done, they bring it back to the plenary, then they look at it and decide, not just that the privileges committee alone would just take their decision and that's the end of the matter. No, let's look at it because there are broader issues at stake. Okay. Yes.
So there are people who are so unhappy with the NDC in its posture in this matter that someone who is paid by our tax money has not been in the house for the entire sitting. How many months? And she's paid. And first people were angry that the president couldn't muster the courage, so to speak, to sack her. And eventually when the president decides to, do away with her, he says it is the appointment that has been revoked. He doesn't say he's been sacked.
Well, I think in relation to the president's statement, the revocation, in my opinion, constitutes a dismissal, because that is what the Constitution talks about in terms of relieving a minister of their position. The Constitution actually talks about revocation of the appointment. And so in my view, that constitutes a dismissal of Adwoa Safo. I was particularly surprised to read that from the presidency, because in my view, even though I knew I hadn't read anything that suggested Adwoa Safo had been dismissed, I was quite curious whether indeed the president was still keeping her as a minister for a sensitive and an important ministry as gender and social protection. Of course, the statement from the presidency then confirmed the fact that, all this time, Adwoa Safo was still a minister and was being paid. And the president was okay having a caretaker minister for that ministry.
So she was being paid as MP and a minister?
Of course. Even though they would say, well, you can't receive double salary. And so if you're a minister, there is a little bit,
that's right,
above an MP salary. Yes. So those who are MP ministers would obviously be receiving the conditions of service of a minister. So for those almost a year now, she's being paid, with no work being done. But the president was okay. Now, on Parliament, I think that our Parliament need to take us quite serious by at least making us convinced that in terms of the rules, they enforce it when they enforce it not only when it affects outsiders, but also when their own members, infringe the laws. The Constitution is quite clear. If you absent yourself for 15 days without a written permission from the Speaker, you are automatically supposed to be referred to the Privileges Committee, and that is where you acquit yourself. So for me, the expectation is that these 33 MPs, and the Adwoa, Safo, Henry Kote, Kennedy Japan referral was triggered by a
Ras
petition.
Mubarak.
Yes, was triggered by a petition. Of course, Ras Mubarak may not be aware that all these others, the other 30 MPs have also absented themselves for that number of days. That then automatically requires that they be referred to the Privileges Committee. I expect Speaker Babin to do the right thing, to adhere to the tenets of the Constitution, unless, he comes out to say, look, Odukro got it wrong, and that not all of them absented themselves without my permission. But I'm tempted to believe Odukro, because it's almost been normalized that, as an MP, you can, be absent, still collect your salary, and so on and so forth. But now that we have this evidence, I expect Speaker Babin to do the right thing by referring them to the Privileges Committee. I'm not saying that they ought to then vacate their seat, because the Constitution talks about the conditions under which they vacate their seats, and that is that if the MP is absent without permission in writing, the permission must be in writing of the Speaker, and he is unable to offer a reasonable explanation to the Parliamentary Committee on Privileges. My understanding, therefore, is that once you absent yourself for 15 days without the written permission, automatically you owe the Privileges Committee an explanation. And that means that you must be referred. So I expect a referral of all these people to the Privileges Committee. If at the committee they are able to acquit themselves. And Ghanaians would be happy. The Ghanaians, the confidence that they may have in Parliament will be boosted once we have the evidence that, look, the Speaker is doing the right thing by, referring these people to the Privileges Committee. It's almost like a headmaster being in school. People don't come to school and nothing happens. And then you have evidence that, look, this person, for this number of days, they've not come to school. And then if in the end, we don't see any action on the part of the Speaker, then I will be quite curious. The next time an ordinary person or a member outside Parliament is referred before the Privileges Committee, because we must all be equal before the law. And I believe in Speaker Babin to do the right thing. So that is what I will look forward to.
Dr. Chamba, at least now something is happening, isn't it? People have been shocked and surprised, but I don't know what we do about getting surprised and shocked, because a parliament of 275, they need 1/3 to form their basic quorum to conduct business. Will you believe that there have been times that they can't get the 1/3, which is only 92 of the 275 members? And you have had speakers complain over and again, but nobody ever cracks the whip. In 2016, they couldn't get a quorum to debate the budget. So something good is happening now, right?
Well, to an extent, and I'll come to that, but I just thought I had a small point on Senior Martin's spraying exercise. I think if you recall, in the early days of the pandemic, many countries, because the scientific evidence was changing, we saw them actually do some spraying. I mean, I saw tapes in China and a few other places, all of that. So perhaps the issue is not really so much about the spraying itself and whether it wasn't scientifically valid, but more about, of course, the cost, and all of that. So I just thought I had that point in the list.
In that particular documentary, Manasseh spoke to about 4 of the experts from Noguchi, from University of Ghana, and I think from KNUST, and they said there was no science to it, that you go to a classroom that has been there for months without anybody being there. There's no point spraying because it's a waste of time. And they use the World Health Organization advice to make that claim. But of course, there was the doctor, the director of the Ghana Health Service, who said, well, like you just said, they were not sure. Yeah. So it was okay too.
No, yeah. I am making this just on the basis of some of the tapes that I saw in the early days of the pandemic.
Okay.
The science was constantly sort of changing. But I think there's a very valid point about the cost.
Right.
Because in this country, we know that many of these things are inflated. And ultimately, some money, changes hands somewhere. That's a fact that we can agree to. So now specifically today...
But the small issue about that also is that the spraying exercise, there was already a contract for the company to be doing the spraying every year.
Thank you.
Now, when the pandemic came in, they got a contract which was not the same contract. So the question was, are they doing a duplication and being paid twice?
I think that's why we need that public inquiry.
Yeah.
And
the Constitution mandates
fully support some form of inquiry around that, and being able to come to a full realization as to how those monies were spent.
Yeah, and in fact, he spoke to the district assemblies. Kumasi, for example, they said we can do this.
Excellent.
We have told them we can do it. We have been doing it, some of it over time. So we have all the equipment. All we need is just little money to buy the chemicals.
That's it.
And they were
spent over 100 million Ghana cedis.
Somebody is sitting in Accra and crimming off the contract, preventing it from going to the district. So,
anyway, okay, so let's go to...
But on the parliament thing, I think one of the things we need to interrogate is why do we get these persistent absences, going all the way back several years.
Right.
And I think a part of the core reason really is the constitutional structure or provision where you have to take a certain number of your ministers from parliament. And I'm sure when many of these, it's about 40 or so on the list, are called to the privileges committee, they might say that they were actually engaged in a very important national exercise. And they may not have given the written permission or whatever, but they can equally come and attempt to wiggle their way out. And I think the solution, or maybe what we should all consider really is, has it come a time now as Ghanaians to actually think about decoupling, those two provisions, where you can actually select your ministers from wherever you want without necessarily the recourse to the parliamentarians. Because I think the number is about 50% or so, if I'm not mistaken. So if at any point you have 80 plus ministers and let's say half of them are coming from the House, then it's going to be a problem.
Okay.
But also, of course, it cuts across. So there are also other opposition MPs who locally would miss sitting in the House and all of that. But I think
the three MPs were for sittings for the first session, but this other list that they have brought is for the current session.
Absolutely. And so we need to see the committee and the speaker crack some whip. The process has to be fair.
Right.
And I think the privileges committee will give them the avenue to come and explain themselves. Borrowing Suleiman's point about the headmaster calling you to his office and asking you, Kojo, what did you do? Give us the reasons why that. But at the end of it all, I think the fundamental point really is we need constitutional reforms in this country. We spent a lot of money, over $20 million in 2010, 2011, canvassed a lot of positions, and literally threw away that 1,000-page document as though the money didn't matter. And that is where I think we need to sort of focus a bit of our attention on.
Thank you very much. Linda, what do you say? You had been advocating, gender groups had been saying that there ought to be a replacement for Adwoa Safo. Now there's a replacement, but the question is, does she lose her seat? Yes, she will lose the seat, but how that decision will be made is the issue. What do you make of what is going on?
Something I think is very worrying. For me, it's very sad that parliamentarians are just absenting themselves from parliament without permission. They might have reasonable reasons, excuses why they are not there. But without permission, it's actually not pardonable. And
yeah, look at Henry Kote, for example, very good excuse. He was actually not well, was taken out, actually paid to be treated by Parliament itself.
Yeah. And then if you also look at the list, I see members of Parliament who are every now and then holding government to account. And that is when I go like, the biggest problem we have in this country is accountability and non-enforcement of rules. So then you are very bold on airwaves, always holding government to account, and then we see your name in such a list. And also because Parliament is winning awards, Open Parliament something not too long ago. Then you look at the award winning, and you look at the list from Odikru, and you look at the performance of Adwoa Safo, then you're like, what is happening in the country? We can't actually add one or two together. I think Speaker Bagwin should do something about this. Then if they investigate and Odikru's information is right, where there are sanctions, they should be applied appropriately, because they are the lawmakers, and the laws should be, or the rules should be applied also in this particular case. But for me, they are short-changing Ghanaians. I can't be in Parliament to actually express my opinion on matters, and I expect my member of Parliament to always. I've actually been looking through, and my MP from my hometown, I saw his name on the list. I don't want to mention him.
All right. Let me share a few of your messages. Kofi Amwa says, even in developed countries with proper developed systems, passport is allowed to register SIM cards. It's sad. Why are we making things difficult for ourselves? Akoto says the NIA should not be blamed for the chaos of the SIM registration exercise. NIA was not designed to issue cards to all Ghanaians for SIM registration by 31st of July. The NCA and the Ministry of Communication should make the process easier for Ghanaians. Troy Boateng says, we are just in a pointless loop, doing the same thing over and over again without being creative about it. Is it a gap in our technology or ideas? Zacchaeus Ma says, I have registered for my Ghana card, but I went several times to take my card and they kept on giving me excuses. I still haven't gotten my card. How is it my fault that I have not registered? Young King says, there are good officers, but why are the Ghana police personnel still not being equipped with body cams to monitor and check their arbitrariness? The lengthy rejoinder to the Afrobarometer survey does nothing to the perception, but action to prove otherwise. John Mufti says, corrupt officials are not even bothered that you would find out about their crimes and corrupt practices. Their only consolation is that you can't do nothing about it until you can do something about what you found out. No exposure or investigation would do anything. Rock, same biometric data for one person being taken by different telcos. Maybe we can find a way to make one biometric data accessible to all telcos to reduce our stress. And I discovered that most of your comments have been dedicated to the SIM registration and the deadline. All right, so just in some 30 seconds or a minute, you may have some opportunity to say something about that. What do you say about that?
I think we should extend the deadline. For me, it's a no-brainer that you want to cut several Ghanaians out just because they don't have access to that. Yeah, so yeah.
All right. Thank you so very much. This has been Newsfile, and my guests have been Suleimana Brahima, Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa. Dr. Theo Champong is political risk analyst and economist. Martin Pebu is lawyer and rights activist. Linda Ofori-Kwafo is Executive Director, Ghana Integrity Initiative. Earlier, we spoke to Dr. Eric Odro-Sine, who is Director General, Internal Audit Agency. And we also spoke to Maximus Ametogo, Technology Analyst. I'm Samson Ladia Nyanini. Have a good afternoon. Thanks for your company.